Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion. I am Katja Gershak. I'm the director of the Center for European Perspective, and I will be the moderator of today's discussion entitled Aggression on Ukraine, Lining Up the West. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Some of us are here live, and we have a number of audience joining online. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time, and particularly for the panelists to be here with us today and to discuss this hugely important topic that has changed our worlds upside down, so to speak. And I don't believe I exaggerate when I say that. Before I introduce the panel and before we continue, I would like to invite Ambassador Iztok Mirošič. He's the program director of the Blitz Strategic Forum for his opening remarks. And I would also like to thank the Atlantic Council for partnering with us at this discussion. So Iztok, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everybody, ladies, gentlemen, panelists, friends. As you know, Bled Strategic Forum is a leading think tank in Central and Southeastern Europe, dealing with security, economic, political, and other questions that are relevant in time. And what is more relevant than it is situation in Ukraine, security situation in Europe, and consequently security situation also in the world. That's why we gathered today to explore, let's say, unprecedented and brutal security situation in Europe when one state made clear and brutal aggression on the other state, sovereign state. And this is the aim of the panel, which is called Aggression on Ukraine, Lining Up the West. Just let me repeat. We are witnessing daily the images of destruction, refugees, and death. The tears of fleeing children are just heartbreaking. The entire cities are devastated and destroyed. And this is happening in Europe of today. Russia attacked Ukraine. Our sympathies are always with attacked one. And especially when Geneva Convention, war conventions are breached and civilians are attacked in an undiscriminatory manner. They have the right to self-defense, and we should help them. And we, the West, we lined up. We stand united with Ukraine, we stand united in the European Union, and we stand united in our transatlantic family, meaning NATO. This is the most powerful message to aggressor who wants to change not just European, but also world security order, architecture, multilateral arrangements, including the international organizations and international law. We are in front, basically, of one of the redefinition of the global world order. And yes, by supporting Ukraine, we support freedom, sovereignty. Above all, we support democracy, rule of law, liberties, and civil rights. That means that we support basic European Union values, to which Ukraine, and I have to add also Western Balkans, belong. Democracy, not autocracy, will prevail. And we in the European Union, we should finally define what is our common European Union interest. Like every single nation has a national interest, we should define what is the European Union interest, which means that we have to complete the so-called strategic compass of the European Union to deal with the security situation that is imminent on our doorstep. In this European tragedy, it's perfectly clear what is bad and what is good. It is perfectly clear what is right and what is wrong. And stop the aggression in Ukraine and give space to diplomacy. What we have to do more? This is the aim of this today's panel, and I hope this panel will give some guides, some guidelines also for our behavior in future. I wish you all the best in today's panel, and I wish you a fruitful work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iztok, for your very heartening talk. I would like to now introduce the panelists. We have with us an excellent panel of experts, Mr. Mihailo Gončar. He's the founder and president of Center for Global Studies Strategy 21 from Ukraine. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Stefan Meister, he's the head of program for International Order and Democracy, German Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Jerne Müller, who is happily sitting right next to me, is political director, Director General at Directorate for Common Foreign and Security Policy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia, and Ms. Anna Weisland, Director for Northern Europe at Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us. Like Iztok pointed out, yet again, history makes its mark on Europe. This is not a situation that either of us wanted to be in. The war in Ukraine that is quite clearly instigated by Russia will no doubt have a lasting impact on European security, on global geopolitics. The conflict, which has global implications, I would say, could signal a beginning of growing instability in other regions as well. And we certainly are looking at possibility of this spilling into EU countries. We have quite a lot to discuss. However, on the other hand, with full outrage and support that we have for Ukraine, we have also seen something unprecedented, which is the unity of the West. That is, for a very personal mark, very heartening to see. And sadly, that we have not seen that before. It always takes a crisis. And perhaps out of a crisis, many more things are born that would be hopefully good for our future. So without further ado, let's start this very interesting discussion. I would like to first turn to Mr. Gončar. You are in a very difficult situation in the midst of conflict in Ukraine. Would you please be kind enough to tell us what's the current situation and how you see this evolving?
Thank you so much. Good morning to everybody, dear ladies, gentlemen, your excellencies. First of all, thank you so much for support and solidarity with Ukrainians, with our people. Thank you for support for our refugees. Thank you for support and readiness of Slovenian government to support our armed forces. It's very important for us. First of all, I would like to emphasize once again the term war in Ukraine is not relevant when talking about Russia's actions as direct military aggression against Ukraine. During 8 years, Western officials have followed the narratives of Russian propaganda named Russian aggression as a conflict in and around Ukraine.
I apologize. I believe we have some technical issues. Mr. Gončar, I'm sorry. Are you back with us?
Yeah. I came back. I switched off my picture because internet signal is not so perfect. So,
understood. Thank you. Yes. You feel free to do that. Yeah. Please continue.
Thank you.
We can hear you. Thank you.
On February 26, there was already fake information that Kyiv and Ukraine have fallen, that President Zelensky has run away from the capital. Some of our hybrid friends in Berlin also believed that Russian blitzkrieg took place and even called me to ask whether I see Russian troops in Kyiv. The current situation is as follows. Let me jumping from point to point. First, Putin's blitzkrieg that was similar to Hitler one has failed. The invaders are dispersed across the huge territory. Their logistics was disrupted. They cannot consolidate under fire of the Ukrainian armed forces. The war becomes protracted. Let me remind you that Russian aggression against Ukraine started on February 2014 with the occupation of Crimean Peninsula. Second, Russia continues air missiles and bomb attacks. The frontline bombers, such as Sukhoi 24 or Sukhoi and Sukhoi 34, are being used,
but it leads to significant losses due to our air defense forces. As of yesterday evening, 167 hostile helicopters and aircrafts that took part in air raid on Ukrainian cities were shot down. Consequently, Russians started to use strategic aviation. Tupolev 22 M3, Tupolev 160, Tupolev 95. That launches cruise missiles out of our air defense operational limits from the Black Sea and Azov Sea aquatoriums. Similar to what happened on March 12 at Yavory International Center for Peacekeeping and Security near Lviv. Tochka U and Iskander ballistic missiles are continuously launched from Belarus. So, at the same time, Russia continues to strike Western Ukraine in order to make the impression of full-scale invasion everywhere. Despite the decreased probability of invasion from Belarus, it's still not equal to zero. Lukashenko is under the constant pressure of Putin, who forces him to send Belarusian troops against Ukraine. Also, taking into account that the United States and NATO fear to establish the no-fly zone, at least over the Western Ukraine, Russia will try to strike at supply routes to Ukraine from neighboring EU and NATO countries, such as Poland, Slovak Republic, Romania. It is likely at routes from Poland, as it provides a principal aid traffic. Deadly, multiple missile strike on military base in Yavory on March 12 were very demonstrative. The chance that the West forces Russia to stop its operation and withdraw its military contingent from Ukraine, from the military point of view, is quite low. Kremlin sees that the unity of West is based on fear of Russia, not the willingness to stop the aggressor. Fifth, as Ukrainian military forces strongly resist and defend cities, as the conflict becomes protracted, it seems the enemy will use Syrian tactics. That means total destruction of cities. We already witnessed some elements of these tactics when big cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol, Chernihiv, Sumy, or small towns as Ochtyrka, it's in my homeland, where people strongly and bravely resist. And being bombed and shelled. Massive shelling and bombing are aimed at attempt to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people, scare them and force to support the idea the government capitulates. Probably, this will become the main tool of Russia for the nearest months. 6. Aiming at decrease of American and NATO's support for Ukraine or even full stop, the Russian Federation may cause problems in other regions using its proxies. Kremlin wants to show the United States that it has other problems, not only Ukraine. Terrorist attacks in Europe and or the United States aimed at diverting the attention from Ukraine. It's not excluded. 7. The effect of sanctions on Russia will grow, but it won't reach a critical impact for nearest weeks, as Russia's economy will continue to exist on its reserves. The longer term is needed, at least 6 months, in case that there are no option to circumvent sanctions and bypassing schemes of China and Iran, and then Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. The position of the European Commission regarding the route for different supplies to Russia through Belarus is disappointing. If the EU wishes to stop Russian aggression, the blockade of Russia shall be total. In other words, the Iron Curtain is needed. It should not look like a cheese with big holes, as it was in 2014 when the Crimean Peninsula was occupied. 8.
There is a high probability that after a certain operational pause, Russia will resume attempts to capture Mykolaiv and Odessa in order to capture the south of Ukraine, access Transnistria, and cut off the country from the sea. Mining of northwestern sector of the Black Sea means that a naval blockade is imposed on the movement of merchant vessels to and from the port of Ukraine. This will affect and already affects the world food market, as Ukraine, as you know, is among the top 10 world exporters of agricultural production. Nice. Russia is trying its best to establish control over the key elements of our energy systems, the United Power System, nuclear power plants, and the gas transmission system. If this is not possible, the aggressors' troops will act to destroy key facilities of our United Power System and gas transmission system in order to weaken Ukraine's energy system and gain additional leverage to force Ukraine's leadership to surrender on the Kremlin's terms. Although Russia continues to supply gas to the EU, it may well be able to restrict oil and gas exports in order to blackmail Europe by threatening to cut off supplies, causing price spikes to keep European EU and NATO countries from supporting alliance. I would like to pay special attention to the capture of Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia and the non-functioning Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The international atomic energy agencies are assuming remote reports that no radiation leaks are observed should not mislead you. Under the guise of searching for evidence that Ukraine was secretly creating a dirty bomb in Chernobyl, in fact, the Kremlin is hatching a diabolic plan. I hope you know that Chernobyl zone is a swampy area, and this peat bogs. There are millions of tons of peat, which since 1986 Chernobyl time tragedy contains radionuclides. Global warming has led to the drying up of these peat bogs. They burn from time to time in summer and sometimes in spring. The last fire was in April 2020. It was hardly extinguished. If peat bogs and contaminated forests are set on fire in the exclusion zone around Chernobyl, dangerous radioactive nuclides will be released into the air together with peat smoke. No one knows where the wind will blow, in the direction of Kyiv or Belarus, the Baltic and Scandinavia, Central Europe or the Balkans, as well as how long it will burn, especially in circumstances where no one will put out the fire. Putin know his verstehers in the standardized Western Europe politics will see the fall of Ukraine. Ukrainians do resist and will resist. History leaves us no choice. Putin's goal is not only to conquer Ukraine as a territory. His goal is to destroy Ukrainians as a nation on his own territory. Soviet Russia already did this in 1932-33. It was a Holocaust like Holodomor that took the lives of millions of Ukrainians. Therefore, we will resist. And our goal is not only to expel the aggressors from Ukraine, but also to destroy the hating Putin's regime by international efforts. Russia is an existential threat for us, as well as for our neighboring countries, Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, Poland, and so on. Therefore, we must work together. The tens of thousands of casualties suffered by Ukraine as a result of Russian aggression since 2014 make it impossible for Ukrainian leaders and society to accept the peace through status quo formula. Ukraine's position is to withdraw occupation troops from all over Ukraine, including Donbass and Crimean Peninsula. Post-Putin Russia, it's my last point. Post-Putin Russia needs a plan that Ukrainian civil society has already named as 8D plan: demilitarization, denuclearization, decentralization, deindustrialization, democratization, decommunization, de-Stalinization, and deputinization. We need it. Not only we who are in Ukraine, who are Ukrainians, but all Europeans. Thank you so much for your attention.
Mr. Gončar, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing this view with us. And we hope to have a discussion to keep you online so that we can have a discussion about some of the really important issues you raised. I would like to turn to Mr. Müller, and Mr. Gončar actually raised a very interesting point that apparently Kremlin is seeing the unity of the West as based on fear rather than let's say, a general unity or based on our values, on our purpose of our intent in general. So there's a quite big of a difference. So in that sense, do you think that, can you comment on the European response? And do you think the unity, which is unprecedented, which we're witnessing today, is it really based on fear, or is it going to last? What do you think we can expect?
Thank you very much. I think that the unity of the West is something that came as a surprise to Moscow. I mean, I can be a bit of self-critical and also say that it came as a surprise to us also, to European countries. Why I'm saying that is primarily, I'm saying that because one of the issues that came up right now, or one of the understandings, is that we are not defining our unity based on how many meetings we have, but on what decisions we actually take and how we implement the decisions that we are taking. I think that in principle, the invasion of Ukraine is something that we all predicted will have serious consequences. But how these consequences are part of the decision-making system in the Europe, I think that this came as a surprise, especially to Russia. So there is a surprising unity between or inside European Union. Why I'm saying this? I think that what we are seeing right now, basically agreements that are being discarded all over Europe with the Russian Federation. European nations took decisions for strong sanctions on the Russian economy. European nations, especially EU, has also taken an unprecedented decision to help Ukraine with little equipment, which is something that Europe has never done before. And this is also something that, to me personally, came as a surprise in a meeting of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was very much specified. It's not NATO, it's the EU that is basically helping Ukraine with military equipment. I think that it also came as a surprise to Russia, the fact that European countries and Europeans as such have said that, and are prepared to make sacrifices. They are prepared to go into stronger sanctions, although they know that, let's say, in the short term, this might have a negative effect on their daily lives. Many have thought that it would be unthinkable that European Union might take steps in the context of getting more independent from Russian fossil fuels, from gas, and everything else. So I think that European Union here is more unified than it has ever been in the history of the last decade or at any time in this century. But when I was preparing for this, I also, because I was part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and I was also dealing with European sanctions with regards to annexation of Crimea. And I just wanted to compare the timeline in 2014 and the timeline in 2022. So I think that in 2014, the annexation of Crimea started by the end of February 2014. The EU adopted the first sanctions against individuals on 17th March, strengthened these sanctions on 15th of April, and there was an agreement on a new set of sanctions basically reached on 12th of May in 2014. I think that in 2022, as an example of what is actually the fact that is surprising Russia, is the fact that the European Council met on the same day that the invasion started, and the next day, the first set of sanctions was already adopted. And basically all of the sanctions that EU is adopting right now, including yesterday's, the fourth package of sanctions, is stronger by definition than what it was in 2014. So I think that this shows some determinants of European countries and the unacceptedness of what Russia is doing with invading a sovereign country and changing basically the whole European security order that we know. If it will last, I hope it will. If I go a bit further in a theoretical manner, I would say that this also negates all the discussions that we had in the European Union when it comes to the efficiency of the European Union and the change of the decision-making system. There were ideas about going to qualified majority voting because many member states thought that EU is not efficient enough in the decision-making process, that we cannot respond to the situation at the global level. But I think that this basically negates all of the discussions that we had in the previous months and years. And it shows that the EU can be very much united, it can be very much efficient, and it also can play and is playing, let's say, a global player role also in the security context. The last thing that I just wanted to mention that also speaks about the efficiency of the EU and what we are as European Union, what we are prepared to make. It's also the fact that we decided on granting European perspective per se to Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, which for decades was something that we never even discussed very much about without getting into a very heated discussions. But I think that this situation right now shows that when the need arises, EU can live up to the expectations of its own citizens and also to the expectations of the citizens of the countries that should already be part of Europe. So I don't know if I answered everything, but I'm open for further discussions. So thank you.
It's quite a lot to be answered. Let's turn now to the transatlantic perspective. Ms. Anna Weislander, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I would just like to get your feel for usually when the Europeans and Americans discussed sanctions, anything related to Russia, it was somewhat seemed to be the other way around, where the Americans seemed to be pushing further and the Europeans were somewhat divided a lot of the times. And now it seems like, is that okay? Can we hear me? Okay, sorry. And now it seems like it's just the opposite. So how do you see, how is this seen on the other side of the transatlantic? How do you see the transatlantic alliance? How do you see European security and the geopolitical dynamics changing on your end?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and for hosting this extremely important discussion. Yes, I would like to say that just as Mr. Müller said, unity has been extraordinary given the past years, not only the drift across the Atlantic that we experienced during the Trump administration, but also the start of the Biden administration with the withdrawal of Afghanistan and also the AUKUS alliance, which caused storms across the Atlantic. But we have, and also different views on China, I should add. But I think, as previous speakers have said, that Putin calculated on a weaker response, that we would be more fragmented, but it has held not only within Europe, but also across the Atlantic. And I think it's you can see three tracks here that can explain this unity. US has been determined to consult with allies and partners, and you can see this consistently regarding this crisis, and it has been successful, and those efforts have bared fruit. Secondly, I think it's obvious for everybody that the US has led this. It's about US leadership, and here comes, as you indicate, the push that the US has provided also towards Europe to comply on sanctions, for instance, nightly discussions with Italy, or hard discussions with Germany, also on Nord Stream 2, the pipeline in the Baltic Sea, SWIFT, etc. So you can see that the US has also been a very active leader in this process. And then I think that the unity that you see across the Atlantic also has been facilitated by what we heard here from Mr. Gonchar, and I think it's right in that we are driven by fear to some extent in Europe. The unity is based on fear of Russia, and you can see that with some allies and partners that sometimes are reluctant or do not immediately comply. Turkey or Hungary, but they are so close to the Russian threat, which is now of such magnitude that this fear, the threat, also contributes to transatlantic unity, I would say. Now, will this last, you can ask? And I think given these three components then, consultations, US leadership, and the magnitude of the threat that we see here with an actual war of big brutality, it will last. I think there will be discussions on the way. There will not always be, consent immediately. But I think if these three components continue, we will see continued NATO unity, and that will actually mean that NATO is strengthened by this crisis. Geopolitically, then, just a few words on that. I think you can see it both ways. On one way, both that NATO is strengthened. I don't think that was in the calculus of Putin as we have seen it so far. It can even be new members. You have big discussions where I'm situated. I am heading the Northern Europe office of the Atlantic Council in Stockholm, and Helsinki in Finland. There are big discussions now on whether we should join NATO as well. But on the other hand, you must realize, I think, that there is a big risk that this is, to start, this is an expansionist war by Russia. And that will could result in more territorial gains for Russia when it comes to Ukraine. And if you add then, as we have heard here, previous speakers say also, the fact that Belarus is now basically sits in the lap of Kremlin is in fact almost part of this union that they have on paper. Then you have a geopolitical setting which has changed. I think we really need to pay attention to the contested space here, Georgia, Moldova, and Western Balkans. We have heard that we do so, but I think we could do much more, and that the lessons learned now from the previous months in trying to help Ukraine before the invasion, we should apply those lessons also on these countries to the extent that they want it themselves, of course. I would also say from the geopolitical setting, what we have seen here Russia-China alignment, not an alliance, but alignment, is very important to take into account. It's a closeness of their relationship that we haven't seen in modern times. It continues. We cannot really see the extent of it, but definitely there is something there. And I think the consequences then, if you see just a round up on the future of the transatlantic link, I think we see NATO stronger, but I also think that the consequences for us, the lessons learned, are that there is really no room for the US and Europe to drift apart in a world which is so full of tensions as this one. And I think, and I hope that we really see this much clearer now than we did before. Globally, each one of us is too small to influence, and we really need to stick together. And that also goes even if there will be another administration in the US elections after 2024, because there is for Europe, I think, a shadow of the future here. But I would argue that the systemic forces would be the same for another US administration to deal with, even if we have the return of Trump as some fear here in the discussions. The logic would still prevail that the US and Europe needs to find as much alignment as possible ahead in order to deal with the world as it is emerging. Thank you. I will stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. We'll come back and touch on some of these issues, particularly the Russia-Chinese alignment that you noticed. But let's turn now to Dr. Meister. I would like to ask you whether you believe the conflict may spill over. I mean, we're all looking at this, and Anna mentioned that due to that it could mean destabilization of other regions. What's your view? How have you been seeing this?
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation, and also thank you for this discussion. I think it's really important to have this wide range of topics. Yeah, because I think we are really in a new reality, and even countries like Germany, I think, finally woke up. Unfortunately, it needed a war in Ukraine to wake up for some EU member states, but at least it seems, or it happens now. I think that's at least something positive. Just a couple of words before I'm coming to your main question, but it leads exactly to answer your question. So I think the first thing for me is, for Putin, the war in Ukraine is also a war against the US and its influence in Europe and in post-Soviet countries. So I think he's also fighting in Ukraine. From his perspective, the US, he wants to have regime change, and he again completely underestimated also the role of societies in Russia's neighborhood, and the role of societies also in politics. I think that's a major failure also of Putin we have seen for several times. He's fighting against democratization and successful reforms in Russia's neighborhood to have no spillover effects on Russia. So this is also about regime security in Russia itself. Putin wants a new security order with spheres of influence, buffer zones, and no NATO enlargement in Europe at all. So this is not only about the eastern neighborhood, but this is also about the northern neighborhood or other neighborhoods of the EU. Military means are the main tool of Russian policy. They will remain crucial in a more securitized Russia. I think we should also see that Russia itself is changing now. It's getting more securitized, more militarized, more pressure on civil society and any other opinion. And this will further shift also Russia and might make it even more aggressive. And I think there are, for Putin, no limits. There are no red lines for Russian leadership anymore. And I think that's really a big danger, not only for Ukraine, but for all of us. All countries who want to integrate into transatlantic institutions can become a target of Russian aggression. And I speak here first of all about Moldova and Georgia. So I think if Odessa falls, Moldova is really, really very fragile and might be the next target. But this is also about Georgia, and it might also be later about the Baltic states. I think a lot of it depends on NATO and Western reaction now to this aggression, and I think it needs more than what we have at the moment, even if I'm also impressed by the unity and by the scale of sanctions. But I think this is really about a bigger game for Putin, and I think that we should have in mind. Yeah, we need to focus also on countries like Moldova and Georgia next. Talking about the Balkans, I think that's rather an area which Russia is using to weaken the credibility and the role of the EU and the US in Europe. It has no borders with Russia and would not, first of all, fit into this approach. But I think it is important to European security. And for me, again, it is a failure of European policy. If we look into the enlargement policy in the Balkans, which has been stopped, if we see the backtracking also of the countries in the region, and that we offered also Russia this opportunity, and not only Russia, also China, Turkey, other players, to muddle into the Western Balkans and to weaken here also democratization, reforms, and the role of the EU. And I think that creates now, with the situation we have, also a security threat, which we should not underestimate, even if I think this is not the next goal, yeah, of a Russian aggression. But you can also imagine what kind of hybrid threats are linked to this, or possibly other threats. And I think, again, we need to lessen our learns, and this is also a failure of Western and in particular of European policy. At the same time, the military campaign in Russia is not successful. The prediction about the defensibility of Ukraine was wrong. And I think that changes also at the moment the way Russia is stepping forward and adapting also to this situation. But that does not mean that Putin will stop with his revisionist policy. It's just getting more costly. And he's just adapting to new realities. I think that's the problem. Yeah, I think in Germany you always have this discussion. So maybe that's now the next opportunity to find a solution, to get an agreement. I think it's just adapting to this new situation and not losing the main goals also of Russian policy. Yeah, a lot of depends on how Europe, the US and NATO responds, and how Ukraine is able to resist to a full takeover of its territory. Russia is a spoiler power who needs conflicts and will not find a solution. We will not find a solution of peace in Europe with the current regime. I'm now pretty sure about this, but we have to manage a revisionist regime for some time, which will create more instability in Europe. And I think that's the reality. We will have more instability in Europe with this Russian regime. And that's why it depends really on more reactions also from the Western side in terms of sanctions, in terms of military support. But it depends also on the reaction of China and how we put China under pressure not to support Russia. Yeah, and I think this is a role also for the US, but also for Germany and Europe. Yeah, on how to deal with China. And I think what the US had to learn, and we too. China and Russia are linked. We cannot just decouple and just manage only China, but we have to think both countries together. Yeah, and I think that's also very, very important. And just to finalize this, I think the German government seems to have learned to understand. Yeah, I think there's really a major change in German politics, but I think still there's no leadership, no German leadership in Europe on this crisis. I think it's the US, it's maybe this coordination with France, yeah, but I don't see really the leadership we would need. Russia still has the escalation dominance, and we rather react also to what Russia is doing, also impacting on the information sphere. I think we should really not underestimate this, and I think that needs to be changed. I think that's a pattern we have since 10 years, yeah, so that we react and how to come out of this situation. I think is very difficult, but I think this too late, too little. I think that has to be overcome from our side, and I think again, the sanctions are an important step. Support of Ukraine is an important step, but I think we really need more at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we've seen how over the past decades, just as Dr. Meister kind of eloquently put, because of our interconnectedness with Russia, from energy, economic, geographic, that we've kind of had this concept of peaceful accommodation with Russia, and that we were, we tried to have these relations and this type of peaceful accommodation that are constructive. But however, this has now gone out the window, that's for sure. So I would like to turn to Mr. Gonchar, and actually, given what we're seeing in Ukraine, and this is a very personal note for Ukraine as well. I mean, Ukraine is a country that has a number of people that are connected to Russia. They have families that cross borders. I have a lady living with me right now from Ukraine who has an aunt and some extended family in Russia. So this, people still communicating. But now what we're no doubt going to be seeing is that Russia has created enemies for at least 2 generations in Ukraine. How do you see these relations with Russia evolving? Mr. Gonchar, if you're still with us.
Yes, I'm here. Wait a minute. It's a difficult question. Now, we don't see serious prospect for our bilateral relationship, interstate relations. I think it can be peaceful coexistence in the case when Putin's regime will fail, will dismissed by common efforts. Because of course, we Ukrainians are in resistance. We have not other choice. But you know that Russia is big power. We need more support to establish new model of cooperation, of coexistence with Russia independently, with Putin or without Putin, because we must not have any illusions concerning future of Russia after Putin's age, because Russia really needs denazification as Nazist Germany after Second World War. Because Putinism is the same, it's mix Stalinism and Hitlerism. It's not only against Ukrainians, against Europeans too, against West too. So I told about 8D plan. From my point of view, and not only my point of view, this is a result of our discussion in the civil society circles during the last days. We together, Ukrainians and Europeans and Americans, we need implementation of this formula. Yes, you can think that it's so very radical view. Yes, but Russian aggression is on the table, not dialogue. You remember that our American friends from White House many times repeated and repeat that dialogue, negotiation are on the table. And so what? So we need radical plans how to provide peace after this Russian aggression. It's my opinion. I don't see now. It's impossible to see over horizon because now we need to stop to interrupt Russian aggression.
Thank you, Mr. Gonchar. Yes, I know it was a very difficult question for you in those difficult circumstances to project and actually try to see beyond what is happening on a daily basis in Ukraine. Maybe if I turn to Mr. Miller, just You know, we talked about, you mentioned EU decision making and how fast of what big of an impact it was and how the decision making has now been sped up. And we've seen the European Commission led by von der Leyen talk about EU as a geopolitical player. And I think also either Anna or Stefan mentioned this earlier, that now is the time for EU to start behaving as a geopolitical player. Do you think we're in a world where we now basically see a geopolitical alignment that has blocks, has two blocks? On one side, we have Russia, China, and on the other side, we have the Western bloc. And where does the EU fit, or rather, how should the EU now behave in regards to that? Do you see the world like that? Is that the evolution that we've made literally in the last 3 weeks? What do you think?
Thank you. I personally wouldn't yet create the blocks as mentioned, that there would be US and the Western world on one side and Russia and China on the other side, because I think that this is one of the issues that is not very clear right now. I think that the votes in the UN Security Council and also the voting in the General Assembly of the UN clearly showed that basically Russia is isolated. So I wouldn't say that there is a bloc emerging on the Russian side. I think that the 5 votes that Russia got, or the 4 votes that Russia got, were mainly Belarus and a couple of other countries that are there around as a satellite around Russia. I think that's one of the most important things right now for the Transatlantic Alliance, or for the EU and United States, is basically to try to rally support of all those 141 countries that voted for the resolution in the UN General Assembly, and also to keep working on those countries that basically abstained, like India, China, because they are now somewhere in between. I would also say that this is we will be entering, let's say, a geopolitical game that will try to either define these new blocks or to try to isolate Russia further in the global context. But I think that we shouldn't be perceiving the whole situation right now is that we already are in these new 2 blocks, because I think there are still a lot of opportunities to, if not to get China on, let's say, our side, simplistically speaking, but at least to keep it out of any of the blocks that might be emerging. I'm not 100% sure if China actually wants to be in the same block with Russia. A lot will be decided on the Chinese side also on how, let's say, the other 141 or 140 countries globally try to bring China closer to their own bloc. But definitely China in the whole geopolitical context has its own picture, and on our side nobody is actually 100% aware what the big picture of China and what the Chinese context in this whole new situation actually is.
Ms. Weislander, you brought up the Russian-Chinese alignment earlier. What is your perspective on this? Are there major lessons learned? And I'm sorry we're drifting off to China a bit, but I just find this perspective extremely interesting, and would like your perspective on whether this is benefiting them somehow right now, or how do you think they're viewing it?
Yes, well, I'm not as optimistic in this sense, perhaps, as Mr. Müller, because I think there are clearly signs and interests of China to have Russia close. If you look at, this is the geopolitics, this is the great power game. So 149 countries don't matter. There are just a few that matters in who will, so to say, set the system for the future. And for the great powers, it's always of importance who will dominate Eurasia. And there you cannot, so where will Russia head? Will it be, and I think this is what China aims for, a junior partner to China? Then Russia will be hurt now by sanctions, and that might not necessarily be a disadvantage for China. That could lead to a more compliant Russia, which will be in the interests of China. And what we really see here, and I think we really need to face it, because we will have to take the costs for this, is the division of the world between autocracies, authoritarian regimes that are great powers with vast resources, including nuclear weapons, and the West. And this is what several speakers already said, that Germany, for instance, woke up now because we had a war in Ukraine, and thank God the war has not hit Germany until you wake up. So this is what we have to take the cost, and the discussions of the EU to make Ukraine and other countries accession members, states, for instance, those are the things that we could have done much earlier. Arming Ukraine, we could have done much earlier. Are we arming Georgia? We need to start thinking about these things much more specifically, because the adversaries are thinking about it. That's my view.
Thank you. Dr. Meister, you mentioned before that Europe has basically done too little, too late. Now, I actually tend to agree with you, but here we are in this situation anyway, and we still have a future to project to, so we still have to do something. So how do you see the future of European security, and do you foresee a stronger European push on defense? And how about the geopolitical Europe? What's your thought on what are your thoughts on that? I would like to encourage also our audience, if anybody has a question, please raise your hand here or send it to us on chat. I already have a question. I will come to it in a minute.
So I think we're talking a lot about geopolitical Europe. We're talking a lot about defense. I just think we are lacking a strategic culture in Europe. It's often a very reactive policy. It's crisis management, but it's lacking also to develop a policy in scenarios and developing also a toolbox to react with different instruments. And I think even if we have now this new ground zero, if we have now this really fundamental change, even if Russia cannot return to a kind of normality, I think this red line is crossed, yeah, and it is crossed every hour and every day now in Ukraine, yeah. I'm still a little bit afraid of this appeasement syndrome if the war ends somehow, and I'm just skeptical about the capabilities of thinking really geopolitically and acting really politically. Yeah, I think we often talk, but we don't act in Europe, I think, and we are afraid of the costs. Yeah, so I think this is really a game changer. Germany now invests 100 billion euro in its military, and I think Germans finally understood this is about German security. Yeah, so until now it was far away, like also Karabakh war was far away. Nobody cared about it. Yeah, changes in Belarus. Okay, we did some sanctions, but I think that this has an impact on us, on our security. I think we now finally only understand. But I'm not so sure about European security institutions. I think it is about NATO for me. And it is about also investing more in our capabilities and our common capabilities. So maybe the EU will adapt and it will be in this environment, but I think it will be rather in a NATO context. It's really the question if the US will stay in Europe with the next president. I think that's an open question. I think this is also a discussion in Germany, why we now react, because we don't know. And then we are not sovereign. Yeah, in terms of our own security. So we now really need a middle-term and long-term investment, and that will not just happen. It will not have an effect now, but the world is geopolitical. Europe is not an island anymore. It has to become more geopolitical. It has to change, and it is only changing with pressure from outside. And I think this is just happening now. And again, I think maybe we are too slow, but we are adapting. And only this constant pressure from outside will keep us on track. So I may be here a bit too pessimistic or too realistic, yeah. So, but this is somehow my experience, and I think yeah, it happens now. But let's see what happens after the war and the situation in Ukraine. And yeah, I think more will happen from our side, but let's hope that this is sufficient. Yeah.
Meister, you mentioned, just to stay with you for a minute here, you mentioned the word that has a very strong connotation in European history, and that's appeasement. And I cannot just skip over that. But we also had a question from the audience that came in earlier from Roberto that said, even if this war ends now or would end now, the Russians retreat from Ukraine. And is it then business as usual with Russia and Putin still in power? I know you said that you don't think Putin is going to stop, but for example, hypothetically, if this should end in the next week, do you think we would just go back to business as usual?
No, we cannot go back to business as usual. I think many people have been killed in Ukraine. Putin was talking about possible use of nuclear weapons. Russia in itself is changing also in these days and weeks very much. It's this decoupling, yeah, and how to say it? I think. You talked hypothetically about ending of this war and maybe having a kind of an agreement. I don't think that will be sufficient. I think even if there will be maybe a ceasefire, there will be new dynamics, new attacks. This is a revisionist power. It needs a crisis. It needs this kind of mobilization also for its own survival. So I think that you will not stop Russia at this point with just an agreement, but there will be new activities either in other countries or in Ukraine again. Yeah, because Putin really wants to get Ukraine under control. And I think we understand this now also. Yeah, I think also those countries in the European Union which did not want to understand in the past. Yeah, even if the reality was already there, I think we refused reality. This is also a mental problem maybe in some EU member states. And I think we understand this now, that this is not just a return to normal, that we cannot just bring Nord Stream 2 online or something like this. I think that's not going to work. We have to cut off our vulnerabilities. Yeah, interdependence means vulnerability now. And I think these are the next steps. And I think neither Putin would be willing to accommodate and to accept this kind of ceasefire and stop. He will go further. No, we can accept this.
Thank you. I think, Peter, you had a question. I'll just pass the mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter Gerg from BSF. You talked right now about things not going back to usual after all this horrific stuff ends in the relations between European Union or Europe and Russia. What about, in your opinion, the relations inside Europe or inside European Union? Will they change? Will these differences that we saw before the Russian aggression on Ukraine, will they persist after, or this newfound unity that we are witnessing? Is this something that it's going to hold, it's going to change, it's going to become more geostrategic, also in a sense of doing bold decisions in terms of enlargement, not just towards the Western Balkans, but also the countries that we were talking before, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine? Or are we going, in the context of future of Europe debate that we are having, going to go back to usual discussions about east, west, south, north, and so on and so on? Is this aggression going to change actually the view of how we in the European Union or in Europe can live together? And I'm asking anybody who has some thoughts, maybe Anne or Stefan or even Yerny. Thank you very much.
Anna, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a great question. I'm not sure I have the answers, because I think Europe is always, you know, finding itself by surprise that we kind of live through the next crisis, and that we manage to keep our unity. And it's always it's nothing that we really count on. I think the defining moment is that we need to realize that we have common interests and that our destiny is tied together, because that also provides us with the unity needed to make those sacrifices that might not be, completely in your own national interest, but you can have it in a broader context. We will have extreme strains when it comes to the refugees, for instance, the effects of the sanctions, the energy levels, and not only, and then adding on then, of course, finding ourselves as a security and defense actor in all of this. What I hope for is also coming back to the transatlantic, that if we look at it historically, European unity has always been a push and pull factor. We have had our own dynamics in Europe, but there has also in successful times been a push from the other side of the Atlantic that, Europe should stick together and you're better off if you integrate and if you unite. During the Trump years, we did not have that. We almost had the opposite, which was also harmful for us and weakened the whole. But if we can continue with that, I think that I believe that we should have more confidence in Europe that we are a mature actor at the European level, not only when it comes to trade, but also in other sectors, as we are 60 plus years old by now, and that we are taking it to that level, and that we realize that the alternative costs of not sticking together are also extremely high.
Jernej, would you like to comment on the same question?
Thank you very much also for the question and also for the input. I can say that I think that Europe will not go back to where it was before the invasion of Ukraine, especially with regards to internal dealings between the European Union, and also with regards to the position that the European Union wants to have in the world. Why is this so? I think that, or I would say that I hope that this will not go in this direction. I think that Europe, with everything that it has already done, has made a concrete step forward, and it will be very hard to basically go back to the situation as it was before. This holds true for the decision-making system in Europe, but it also holds true for the fact that Russia under Putin will never be business as usual, even if the invasion of Russia stops. But the scope of the fundamental changes in how Europe or European Union reacts to the situation in Europe or globally, I think will also be fundamental on how the whole situation evolves in the future, not only with regards to Russia, but what we were also speaking before, how China will react to everything. And I think that the internal situation in Europe will be very much dependent also on how the situation around Europe is evolving in the next years and decades to come. But we already seen, as I said before, that there are already changes in the perception of European countries when it comes to some of the policies where we thought that it's mainly technical, like enlargement policy. But now I think that the understanding is more gaining that this is also a very important political tool. So I think that this is a signal that Europe will be changing in the future, or will remain in the course that we are seeing right now.
Can I just add two quick sentences, just very quick?
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Thank you. No, I think I think what we learned is that unity is really crucial, and it is really important. I think the whole anti-EU populism we had also in Europe, yeah, with Hungary and Poland. I think we see how these countries also supporting Ukraine, dealing differently with refugees. I think that's somehow a game changer for me. I think that's the second point, and it's just the first point. And the second point, I think this is also about the business model for the European Union, and particularly also for Germany, which depends very much on a globalized economy, on interdependence with Russia, but also with China. And I think that will be very costly. Yeah, and I think there will be huge conflicts also inside of our societies, changing really our behavior, our defense policy, and our business model. And I think that will only work with the other member states and within the EU and the unity and changing the EU. But I also see a lot of challenges coming up to our decision makers and to our countries. Yeah.
Actually, I want to draw on what you just said and follow up and said, we mentioned the globalized economy. I have kind of three questions going around in my head. One is, are we going to feel the sanctions in Europe? Because we are talking about energy interdependence. We all know that Ukraine and Russia produce a lot of wheat. There are a lot of food products coming from those regions. I mean, are we ready? I think a lot of people are asking, how is this going to impact us as consumers on everyday level? And is the European unity going to withstand that? People are just basically, I mean, I've seen, look, in a very basic level, a couple of small businesses from the little town where I live near Ljubljana have complained that they cannot restock on flour. I mean, maybe that's just the commodity prices going up. Is that something that we can expect happening in the next months, half a year? How about energy prices? Everybody's, kind of stocking up on gas. How is this going to impact on our unity? Number one. Secondly, do you think European citizens, are we ready for this? Do you think people have internalized what has actually happened in Europe and in the world? And also, are we going to that, like you suggested, change our economic model? We live in a globalized economy, but how are we going to start behaving differently? Also, in terms of China, we're already talking about European sovereignty, of how we need to produce more, be less independent on China. And then thirdly, I know I'm spitting out things here, and I'm going to let the panel have a full spectrum on this, but noting that potentially China's now taking notes in the sense that what can happen if the Chinese do something that we would then levy sanctions on them, so to speak. So this is the conflict that we may be potentially looking at in the future. Should the Chinese make any moves that may be unacceptable to us, be it in support of Russia or any territorial claims anywhere else in the world, should we then, if we levy sanctions on China, is China now taking notes of what's happening to Russia and saying, hey, we need to be more independent of the entire global economic system? So where is that leading us in the future? I'm sorry, I know we put a lot out there. I would just like to have around any panelists that would like to respond to any of the issues raised. Thank you. Stefan, you want to start?
I can start. I wanted to propose. Yes, we already feel this. We already feel the sanctions. I think if we are going to the petrol station, I think we feel it. If we look on our gas, heating, electricity bill, I think we see it, and it's just starting. Yeah, and if we discuss here, also in Germany becoming relatively soon independent from Russian gas, with still sticking to nuclear phase out. And having maybe not so much coal, so we're discussing maybe to have for a period of time also coal heating. I think this will also have an impact on other policy areas, on our climate policy. The question is also, can we speed up the Green Deal within the EU, and can we have this changes of our energy policy faster? But everything that takes time, and that will be again take costs also for our, not only for the consumers but also for the industry. Transport will become more expensive. And I'm not so sure if our societies are really willing to pay this price. I think we were sitting for too long in our comfort zone, and we were being afraid of that this comfort zone will disappear. I see a lot of solidarity with Ukraine in our societies. It's really, really impressive. But what comes after the solidarity? Yeah. So, and I think we have to adapt. It will be costly. It will be costly also for decision makers to make some decisions here. But I think we will learn into this new reality. This is what I think. Business model. I think, as I said, for me, Russia and China are somehow linked. They both have the same goal, which is weakening the US-dominated world, weakening also multilateral institutions, setting their own norms. Russia is maybe playing more short-term goal, and China is playing more a long-term goal. But I think the notes the Chinese are taking is that the West is really willing to sanction hard, and we need to decouple even more. So we need to become more autark. We need to concentrate more on our own market. We need to have our own technology and not depend on Western technology. I think that's what that's the notes they are taking at this point. I don't think that they will support Russia militarily. Yeah, and I think they are not a big fan of how Russia is doing this. But in a way, they support Russia, and it is more about decoupling and moving towards autarky. I think that's my impression from this is how I would read in this context China.
Sorry, let me one remark.
Thank you for the question. Very thought-provoking. I will just tackle maybe two questions, or try to give two answers from my personal point of view. I think that when we are asking ourselves how is the situation going to impact us on a consumer level, I think that there is a growing understanding, also inside our populations, European population, that we need to find alternatives. We need to find our own way, and to guarantee that any dropout that comes from the current situation, and from that we were too much dependent on a global scale, and especially on Russia with some products, that we need to do better in trying to guarantee our own independency, or to try to be more, I wouldn't say dependent on other actors, because I think that the general feeling is that we need to do more on being resilient to anything that might happen in the future. I think that this is also one of the, to put it very bluntly, one of the lessons learned that Russia got after the sanctions in 2014, because they said the sanctions that EU adopted at that time actually benefited the Russian economy, because we were more, we went to be more independent from the European market. So they boosted up their own production of, let's say, apples and everything else, and dairy products. On China, I think that I agree with all the colleagues before who said that China is definitely taking notes right now. They're in this note-taking mode. I think that China also doesn't want to be more independent of international system, but the ultimate goal of China is that the international system is more dependent on China. And this is also why one of the reasons why I spoke with China in such a context before, because I think that China is now in this calculating mode. You know, when you're driving on the road and you have a GPS system, and you suddenly turn a right turn that is not part of the road that the system gave you, then it's calculating and recalculating, and it tries to find the optimum road for you. And I think that China right now is in this mode. It's calculating, and they don't know exactly what to do, because they have so many calculations after it, and they are still processing what it actually means for China in a, let's say, more Chinese perspective of the future, which is not 1 year after, but I think a couple of decades after.
Mr. Gonchar, I see you raise your hand. Could you please join us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for all colleagues for understanding. It's very clear for me. Let me some remarks. Of course, high prices for energy resources in Europe, it's not so positive phenomenon, but it's cheaper than war. Let me propose some additional idea, because I don't know, we have a rate alert signal now, so I don't know how long time I can be present. Of course, we need, Ukraine needs armaments. First of all, fighters, old Soviet fighters as Su or MiG, and anti-air defense systems. But you know that Slovenia is on our side, Ukrainian side, very strongly. But what we need additionally, how to minimize of Russian engine of Russian aggression. You very good know that revenues from energy resources export to Europe is a main agent of Russian aggression, not only against Ukraine, but for undermining activity in Europe, inside Europe. So what can I propose? Some ideas, very briefly. Stop direct payment from for Russian gas, oil, or petroleum products on Gazprom, Rosneft accounts, and multiple affiliated companies in Europe. On the part of importing companies in the EU, United Kingdom, or Switzerland. To stop direct payments for Russian oil and petroleum products on the part of importing companies in the EU and other, on the accounts of Rosneft, Surgutneftegaz, Lukoil, and other, including affiliated company in Europe. We need open one special bank account in the European Central Bank or any other authorized bank of the EU, according to the European Commission decision, for example, for the consolidation of payments for Russian energy resources on the part of European countries. To direct all payments on the part of commercial entities to the special bank account in the European Central Bank or any other authorized bank of the EU. To determine special fixed price for Russian companies to receive payment from the special bank account. For example, price that corresponds to the minimal cost production of oil production or gas production in the Russian Federation. For example, only $15 per barrel instead more $100 per barrel, according to the market price. Payments for the supply are made to the special bank account at the market price. Payment to the supplier from the special bank account are made at special price. The difference between special price and market price is redirected to the sub-account for dual-purpose accumulation for current aid for Ukraine, special fund for future operations on the Russian part to Ukraine for the cost damage, and special fund for the compensation for European consumers. So, of course, it's only idea, but we need co-creation, co-creative activity, how to formulate in accordance with EU legislation, in accordance with international law. You very good remember situation around Iraq at the time of Saddam Hussein. You very good remember oil for food program. From my point of view, we not only Ukraine, but Europeans too, we need the same in the context of Russian behavior, Russian aggression. It's my idea for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for concrete proposals and highlighting all the various ways in which the West, Europe and US can help Ukraine. Anna, you had your hand up earlier. If you want to comment on this or any other issues that were raised earlier, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I was just connecting a bit to the previous discussion. I think on consumers and how they are hit by sanctions. You know, what has been stunning is, of course, the response by Europeans to this crisis. And I think we finally feel that, yes, Ukraine is part of Europe. We have been a bit hesitating, you know, they are not, perhaps halfway and so on. And I think we will feel the same with Georgia, with the Balkans. And in that sense, the political leadership here is extremely important, not to make this very short-sighted letting the consumers take the price, but really to turn this into a vision, as Stefan said, of green transition, for instance, you know, speed up and use what the effects here on energy to create a better future for all of us, and including Ukraine. And then I want to see on dependencies and what China is learning. I think we just had the pandemic and huge discussions on supply chains and dependencies in that regard. And we already saw China before this war happened. They turned more inwards. They lowered their expectations for growth in order to be more sustained by their own system. And I think we can see this, you know, one lesson of the sanctions that we put on Russia, I think this would just strengthen them in that. And that is a lesson that we have to take in when it comes to business opportunities in the 3 to 5 year perspective, in 10-year perspective at the Chinese market and the dependencies that we have. I think we need to also lift this to a much higher level and really transform also the supply chains in different ways ahead. So those were the reflections I had on that.
Thank you very much. I think we're practically running out of time, but I would like one very short last round for all the panelists. Basically, I know this is a difficult question, but how do you see the war ending in Ukraine? I mean, wars are always a continuation of diplomacy, one would say, but they also end behind the negotiating table. So very briefly, a short statement from each panelist, particularly Mr. Gonchar, what shall we start with you?
We need a victory. Only one choice for us. Victory over Putin's regime. Not only for us as Ukraine, for Europe too. That's my very brief answer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I can also be very short. I think that also from Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from all the European diplomacies, I think that the answer to this is quite clear. We see the end of the Russian invasion and the restoration of sovereignty of Ukraine and territorial integrity of Ukraine. I think that this is the main goal, and this is the wish that we would like to achieve, mainly to stop the conflict and to get there through diplomatic means and without resorting to further armed conflict.
Stefan, would you like to go next?
I have also wished, yeah, that this would take an end, and Ukraine would keep back its or get back its full sovereignty. But how to say it? I think what we see is that definitely this is a different war than the Russian leadership expects. There is some pressure from inside, and I think the Ukrainian resistance, I think, makes it very, very costly even if Russia will somehow win this war, I think they are not able to win Ukraine. Yeah, so I think there will be a second Afghanistan maybe in Europe. I think that's somehow possible. I think there will be an ongoing warlike situation. At the same time, I think for me this is also somehow the beginning of the end of Putin. I just don't think that he for a period of time can survive this, even if he's getting more repressive. So I think it will also change Russia in a way. But I'm afraid of it will go on, and Russian leadership wants to have it at any cost. Yeah, so and that makes it so difficult to end this war in a diplomatic way.
Yes. Should I continue?
Please.
Yes. Well, I agree with that. I mean, we see a very determined, unfortunately, a very determined Mr. Putin here on what he wants to do, and he's ready to be very cruel and very brutal in order to pursue this war. And it's a great power that Ukraine is facing, as we have heard, and this is an extremely difficult situation, I would say. If you look at great powers versus smaller countries, I'm a Swede. We have several of us here, Nordic, Baltics, others that are, have to deal with Russia throughout history. What you have to, if you, for instance, look at Finland, who had to fight the Soviet Union at several occasions, what you have to deal with are two dimensions: the political survival and the territorial survival of a state. And those, I believe, if we continue to see this kind of warfare, that's what the Ukrainian government needs to think about. If there are possibilities towards negotiations and towards some kind of solution in this. That's what you have to play with, basically two dimensions in this. There will be costs, unfortunately, as it looks. I agree on that because of the complete cruelness of the Russian regime in this.
Thank you so much. I think unfortunately we've ran out of time. I think we could sit here for another 2 hours debating this. We're supposed to have the State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Raščan, with us, and also Ambassador Brodović, the ambassador of Ukraine to Slovenia. They are sadly detained elsewhere. Of course, it's an interesting day today. The Czech, the Polish, and the Slovenian prime ministers are en route to Kiev right now. And they have apparently crossed the Ukrainian border already. So perhaps a small token, but an important one of show of European support to Ukraine. I would like to invite Peter Gerg just for a couple of concluding thoughts, and would really like to thank all of you for being here with us, for engaging in this incredibly important discussion, for listening. And I think it's high time for us to stay united and continue supporting Ukraine as it is a fight for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katya. As Katya already mentioned, we had to excuse our State Secretary, but also the Ambassador of Ukraine, because today is quite a hectic day. So we hope that everything is going to go well. I would like to thank all the panelists. I think the discussion was somber. It was interesting, but it was also, evident of what kind of task and what kind of work Europe, but also, the whole international community is facing in the view of this aggression. I would especially like to thank Mr. Gonchar, because, his situation is very dire. Please keep safe. I know that in Kiev right now you have a red alarm because of the bombs which are falling on the city. So thank you again for taking the time and also sharing your thoughts and your visions of how this can end, and also to other panelists who have been joining us at this time for your impressions and your ideas. It was, as I said again, very timely and very interesting debate. So thank you very much again, and thank you, Katya, for moderating all the panel.